I'm just setting up my notes, but we are ready to proceed in a few seconds. No, just give it to me here. I'm okay. Napalo ko na to eh. So, clean, but I need to see where the amendment is para I'm comfortable. So, kunyari. I guess yung parang sa'yo. Mr. President, we are ready to make our proposed amendments. On Section 2, Declaration of Policy, subsection K. This is an amendment of Senator Gatchalian. This is on page 3, line 1. Delete the word reasonable and replace it with low cost. And on the same page, line 1, after the word gas, insert the phrase pursuant to Republic Act number 7638 or the Department of Energy Act of 1992. We submit, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you. The next item is also on Section 2, still on the Declaration of Policy, subsection M, also an amendment of Senator Gatchalian. On page 3, line 7, after the word aggregation, delete the phrase as a nationwide or grid-wide strategy in order to mitigate. And on the same page, delete line 8 and replace it with whenever economically beneficial for end users and to contribute to mitigating natural gas supply and price shocks. We
Is there
submit.
an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
A minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended for a minute. Pareho lang to. Ba't ang kapal nito? Ito manipis.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed. Please proceed.
Section 4,
Mr. President, I just
Yes,
got-
Majority Leader.
Just an interjection, just got hold of a copy of the September 25, 2024, and the previous amendment refers to line 7, letter M. Is that correct?
yes, Mr. President.
Just to spread into the records, the purpose of this amendment relative to the mitigation of end users' exposure to risks associated with natural gas availability. May we know from the sponsor the reason behind this, just to make this part of the records of this proceedings, Mr. President?
So this is an amendment of Senator Gatchalian, which the committee has accepted, and we accepted this with our understanding that the concern of Senator Gatchalian is that when we have aggregation, we need to ensure that the prices are beneficial to the consumer. So this is a proactive consumer initiative, which we accept, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. We now proceed, Senator Pia.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Majority Floor Leader. So the next item is Section 4, Definition of Terms, subsection B on aggregation. On page 4, line 9, delete the word required and insert the phrase, DOE shall determine the requirements to be an aggregator and designate the same as well as the. And then on the same page, line 10, delete the phrase shall be determined by the DOE And on the same page, line 11, after the word account, insert the phrase consumer welfare. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection?
Mr. President, may we ask from the sponsor, her indulgence again, how would this now be read as amended?
Sure, Mr. President. So, the entire section B shall read as follows. Aggregation refers to the activity of procuring indigenous natural gas, combining it with imported LNG, and selling the aggregated gas to gas buyers in the Philippines or abroad by a participant known as an aggregator. The DOE shall determine the requirements to be an aggregator and designate the same, as well as the minimum percentage of indigenous natural gas for aggregation, taking into account consumer welfare, the production levels of indigenous natural gas sources, the capacity of existing and future PDNGI facilities, and other relevant factors to ensure a stable and reliable supply of natural gas.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the lines now would probably occupy until line number 17. Am I correct, Mr. President?
Are we using the same, no?
Yes, yes.
We have the same
I have a
copy?
copy of September 25, 2024, clean copy. So na-adjust na po lahat yun, Mr. President.
Right. Are you done with your questioning?
Yes, Mr.
Leader?
President.
Okay, there is a pending motion by Senator Pierre with regard to the amendment of Section B.
Yes.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next item is still on Section 4, definition of terms, subsection Z, and this is on page 7, line 11, delete if and replace it with which are. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next item is still on Section 4, definition of terms, and this is on page 8, line 8, delete if and replace it with which are. We submit.
Any objection? There
Mr.
being none?
President,
Yes,
just one
Majority Leader.
clarificatory question. So it will now read wherever economically. Can we have the complete amended phrase, Mr. President?
Yes.
If we delete the word if.
But where's the amended? I thought you have a clean copy. It's actually just a style amendment, which to this representation would be more accurate. The last sentence of that paragraph Z would read, "The plan shall likewise include all studies, programs, and policies for the promotion and development of the distribution sector which are economically beneficial for end users."
So it will now, Mr. President, just a clarification again. So it will no longer be transmission sector as originally written, but distribution sector. But the previous amendment,
No, Mr. President, we are only replacing the word if
If.
with which are.
so it's the if I'm not mistaken, Mr. President, I heard it right. So it's for the development of the distribution
Sector.
not transmission.
Well, there's a couple of lines that have the same amendment, so perhaps the next one.
Because my copy, Mr.
The
President,
next one.
refers to transmission.
Yes. No, Mr. President, that is in
Page-
subparagraph double E. So the first
Yes.
the first time I made that similar amendment is on letter Z, and that's distribution sector, which are.
Can I have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session
Yes, of
suspended.
course.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, this representation is now clarified. We're referring to the previous page 7. And page 7 was the first amendment introduced, and it refers to the words distribution sector on line 11. I was referring to page 8 on line number 8. It's the same, Mr. President.
Yes. Yes. And we've made that proposal. I can't recall if the motion has been
Yes.
accepted.
Okay, there is a pending motion by Senator Pia. Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next one is still on Section 4, on the definition of terms. It is on page 8, line 27. A similar amendment, delete the word if and replace it with which are.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
The next amendment is on Section 4, also definition of terms. This is a Senator Risa Hontiveros amendment, which includes a style change. On page 8, after line 27, insert a new subsection JJ, which shall read as follows. JJ, renewable gases refer to hydrogen, ammonia, biomethane, synthetic methane, and other gases derived from renewable sources. And re-letter the succeeding subsections accordingly. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next amendment is Section 5 on powers and responsibilities of the DOE, subsection F. This is a Senator Gatchalian amendment with some revisions. On page 12, line 19, after the word regulations, insert colon and the sentence, provided that this applies to sales of shares that would result in a change in control of the permit holder or its ultimate parent. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President,
Yes,
Mr.
with the
President,
permission of Senator Kita.
apologize
Senator Sherwin.
for this anterior amendment, Mr. President. This is still on page 9, Mr. President. Page 9, line 10, after the word DOE, replace the phrase, which shall set the performance standard for TPA, with the phrase for PGI facilities, colon, provided that the TPA code for conventional transportation system shall be promulgated by the ERC.
What does the sponsor say?
Page 9, line 10. This is on the clean copy, dated September 25.
Can His Honor repeat that?
Page 9, line 10.
Yes.
After the word DOE,
A DOE?
yes.
Okay, okay.
Replace the phrase, which shall set the performance standard for TPA, with the phrase for PDNGI facilities, colon, provided that the TPA code for conventional transportation system shall be promulgated by ERC. And the reason for that, Mr. President, is the conventional transportation system are considered public utility, and in this concept, whenever it's public utility, the ERC will regulate it, Mr. President. So that's the rationale why we included that. For virtual transportation system, that will be under the DOE, Mr. President. So that's the rationale, Mr. President.
Just an interjection, Mr. President. Can we ask the proponent to have the entire provision, the entire subsection be read
correct.
in its entirety, Mr. President?
So, Mr. President, a third-party access code or TPA code refers to the code formulated by the DOE for PDNGI facilities, provided that the TPA code for conventional transportation systems shall be promulgated by the ERC. This is only insofar as the TPA code for conventional transportation system, Mr. President, the third-party access code.
And subject to style.
Yeah, but actually, Mr. President, it took me a while to study this, no, because it's technical, as we can all see. This amendment is not acceptable to DOE because per DOE, they are the ones that have the expertise when it comes to third-party access of natural gas. Under IPIRA, ERC regulates when it is power-related. So prior to power conversion, or if it is sold for non-power purpose, it is DOE that has the jurisdiction. Fuel like coal and petroleum is within the jurisdiction of ERC only when it becomes a component of power generation. So unfortunately, we can't accept it, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, just a clarificatory question, Mr. President. For public utilities, I think this was also raised by the Majority Floor Leader, for pipelines, which are also which are named conventional transport system. These are considered public utilities. And public utilities are regulated, Mr. President. So in this concept, the regulation will fall under DOE or ERC. And the reason why we propose this, because ERC is already currently the regulator of power, Mr. President. And in the proposal, it will also be the regulator for pipelines, Mr. President, because currently, there's no regulator for pipelines. So it will now fall under DOE,
Yes.
ERC, Mr.
No,
President.
pipeline is under DOE, Mr. President, unless we change the rules, but pipeline is currently under DOE.
For the policy, Mr. President, but for the regulation of pricing, regulation of use, Mr. President, so.
It's not covered by the mandate of E ERC.
Mr. President, can I ask for a minute suspension?
Session suspended.
Ready to resume. Ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, upon consultation with our colleagues, the Majority Floor Leader and the former Chairman of the Committee on Energy, Senator Gatchalian, we have agreed that the best thing to do right now is to leave the provision as is, wherein DOE will technically be the regulator for the time being, because the proper instrument for the inclusion in the power of ERC to regulate these pipelines would be in the amendment to the ERC, the IPIRA law, which is already ongoing with the committee that this representation chairs. So the two gentlemen are amenable to that, Mr. President. So we will leave the provision as is.
All right. Noted.
Thank you. Thank you to the good sponsor.
Mr.
Thank you.
President, the Deputy Minority Leader is seeking the floor.
Yes.
I move that she be recognized.
Yes, with the permission of Senator Cayetano, the Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Risa is recognized.
Salamat po, Mr. President, and salamat to the good sponsor and the gentleman from Valenzuela and the Majority Leader. Just a point of clarification, Mr. President. Nalito yata ako. I thought I recalled na yung previous session, hindi po natapos yung period of committee amendments. Dahil at that time, the chair was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I thought, I remember that the chair at that time was still considering which of our proposed amendments ay, kumbaga, aampunin na niya as committee amendments. So I just would like to see clarification. Ano po ba yung parliamentary situation ng bill na ito? Because I came back into the session hall thinking nasa period of committee amendments pa rin tayo. But then I realized when the good gentleman from Valenzuela interjected, napatanong po ako, Mr. President, nasa period of individual amendments na po ba? So
Yes.
just to clarify the parliamentary situation to this representation, Mr. President, I raise this point of inquiry. Salamat
Yes,
po,
we're,
Mr.
we're in the
President.
period of individual amendment, Mr. President. Yes. No, we started with individual because this is a sub-bill already.
Substitute bill.
Yes, a substitute bill.
So we are in the period of individual
Individual.
amendments, Mr. President,
Yes.
for the record. All right. Salamat po, Mr. President, and to the colleagues on the floor.
Thank you, Senator Risa. You may now proceed, Senator Pia.
Sure. Okay. Our next amendment is on Section 5, Powers and Responsibilities of the DOE, new subsection M. This is a Senator Hontiveros amendment with some styles change. On page 13, after line 12, insert a new subsection M, which shall read as, develop a comprehensive national strategy with input from the National Renewable Energy Board, parentheses NREP, close parentheses, for integrating renewable gases into the energy mix and outlining the roadmap for their adoption. Reletter the succeeding subsection accordingly. We submit.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next amendment is Section 5, Powers and Responsibilities of the ERC. This is a Senator Gatchalian amendment with revisions. On page 13, delete lines 18 to 24 and replace it with, the powers of the ERC shall be in accordance with the provisions of the IPIRA on the organization, operation, regulation of the power industry, and such other powers as may be given to it under applicable law. We submit.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Yes.
anterior,
Yes, with
anterior
the permission of
amendment, Mr.
Senator
President.
Cayetano.
Mr.
Senator
President,
Gatchalian.
on page 12, line 19, after the word regulations, insert the phrase provided that this also applies to sales of shares tantamount to a change in control of the permit holder or its ultimate parent. Provided further that assignment or transfer shall not be allowed near the end of life of a PDNGI facility. So moved, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
I'm checking, Mr. President, because we already read a similar
Oh.
amendment into the record. I'm just checking the difference between what we read and what His Honor is proposing. Sales of shares.
Ay, ano nga ito?
Dinagdag niya.
Sundan mo ito.
So ito additional.
Itong ano. Siya itong mga...
Mr. President, there were concerns, I believe the proposal of His Honor now was included in the submissions made to us, no?
Yes, Mr. President.
And that part raised some red flags among the team in our discussions with the Department of Energy, because it may be tantamount to a violation of the constitutional provision on right to property. Does His Honor have any thoughts on it? This representation is very open. Our goal is really to accommodate as many of His Honor's amendments, especially given his experience. But I just wanted to raise that. And does His Honor have any? Would His Honor like to elaborate so we can weigh in on it?
Yeah. Well, Mr. President, this stemmed from the experience, our experience from Malampaya, wherein the sellers of Malampaya and the buyers of Malampaya argued that there was no change in entities because only shares exchanged hands. But we all know right now that there was a change in control and even management of that entity. So to circumvent the government approval, what these entities are doing is to exchange shares and argue that there is no change in the corporation. So,
That part, Your Honor, has been accepted.
okay, Mr. President.
That part is accepted, so we don't need
okay,
to...
Mr. President. The
next-
proviso,
the
Mr.
next
President,
one.
actually the
next
proviso
one.
came
The
from...
end of life.
Yeah, the end of
Yeah.
life. The proviso came from a research that we conducted in the U.S. wherein some of the assets, for example, nuclear assets or even natural gas asset, at the end of life, they will sell it to a shell company to release them from the obligation of winding down or spending for closure expenses, Mr. President, or decommissioning expenses. And then that shell company will declare bankruptcy, Mr. President, releasing the original company of its obligation to decommission the asset, Mr. President. And that has been I read several articles to that effect, Mr. President, that happened in the U.S. So just to avoid a scenario wherein there's a decommissioning requirement, but that entity will circumvent that requirement by selling the assets
yes.
to a shell company,
Yes.
Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, I'd like to react to that. This representation totally agrees with the concern raised by His Honor. We really wouldn't want that to happen because today we are very much aware of the obligations, very, very important obligations that will only occur towards the end of
Yes,
life. Yun nga yung mga
correct, Mr. President.
decommissioning. It's very relevant in the energy sector, no, in the mining sector,
Correct,
things
Mr.
like that.
President.
So this representation would be inclined to accept this amendment if it refers to a shell company. I'm just thinking also, though, of what if there is a potential buyer who is interested in pouring in more funds. Like in the case of Malampaya now, they're going to drill again. So talagang end of life yung current, but they're going to drill again, and there's a new investor who wants to come in for that reason. Let's say the current investor has already invested what it could or has somehow invested somewhere else. I wouldn't want to deprive us of that opportunity of bringing in a fresh investor who truly has good intentions. So subject to style with His Honor.
Yes, Mr.
Can
President,
His
we're
Honor
open to
work
that.
with us
Yeah,
on-
Mr. President,
on that?
my proposal really stemmed from circumventing the obligation
Yes,
for
of
decommissioning,
course.
Mr. President. So if we
let's
can
work
narrow
with
it
that.
down
Okay.
to that,
Yes.
objective, we're open to that,
Okay,
Mr. President,
so
subject to style.
with that in mind, let's ask our staff to work while I'm going through the other amendments, and then maybe towards the end, we can already have something.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. So,
So we will hold it in abeyance?
yes, Mr. President, please.
All right. Please proceed to your next amendment.
So we go back to, tama ba? All right. So our next amendment is Section 6, Powers and Responsibilities of the ERC, and this is a Senator Gatchalian amendment with revision. On page 13, delete lines 18 to 24 and replace it with, "The powers of the ERC shall be in accordance with," I've read this. I think this, I'll just read it again. This is what I think was on the table when His Honor made his intervention. The powers of the ERC shall be in accordance with the provision of the IPIRA on the organization, operation, regulation of the power industry, and such other powers as may be given to it under applicable law. We submit, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, just a clarification.
Yes, Majority
Would
Leader.
this now probably encapsulate in the near future, in the event that the IPIRA law is amended, the future powers of IPIRA as amended? Would the language include?
Yes, under applicable law. So I believe, Mr. President, when we do amend IPIRA, this will still be, they will be consistent, Mr. President.
Or delegated to it, the pursuant to this act. Subject to style, Mr. President, I think that's correct.
Okay, I'm happy to have any other style change to reflect future amendments to IPIRA.
Okay,
We
please
can proceed, Mr. President.
Yes.
Mr. President, I have an anterior amendment, Mr. President. On
Senator
page,
Gatchalian?
yes, thank you. On page 13, lines 19 to 20, delete the phrase
18 to 20.
and section 11 of RA 11646, otherwise known as the Microgrid Systems Act.
That has been accepted
Accept-
already.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, Mr. President.
So the next item is on Section 15, Powers and Responsibilities of the National Commission on Indigenous People.
Page.
On page 17, line 15, after the word upon, delete the article the. That is all, Mr. President, we submit.
Any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the sponsors, the deputy minority leaders is likewise seeking the floor.
Okay.
move
With
that
the
she be
permission of
recognized.
Senator Cayetano, Senator Ontiveros recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. With apologies to my colleagues on the floor, I wish to raise, originally I was going to raise these anterior amendments after the good chair and the gentleman from Valenzuela finished with the individual amendments. But upon consultation with the majority leader and the good majority leader's advice to raise them now before we go further in the bill, I will do so. I'd just like to make of record, Mr. President, that I submitted these amendments before this clean copy as of September 25 was drawn up. But I'm, as of today, still waiting for feedback regarding my proposed amendments. So I apologize that
yeah.
my anterior amendments, yung pagination nila, at saka yung line, will not correspond anymore to the clean copy as of September 25. Kasi ito pong anterior
Previous.
amendments ko were based on the previous clean copy, and these anterior amendments to which I was still awaiting feedback on up to today. So just for the record, Mr. President. So if I may.
If I may
Yes,
also,
Mr.
before
President.
Her Honor continues. So Her Honor is correct. We received the written amendments from different senators, including Her Honor Senator Risa Hontiveros. And what you will what you will see in the clean copy now and the additional amendments we are making, which is following the chronological order, are those that we are accepting. So the amendments that have already been read, that has passed the section, have not been accepted. But Her Honor is free to put it on the floor and we can give an official response. But just to advise that that is really the situation. We tried to accept as much as we can for the consistency of the bill and pursuant to its objective. I apologize that we're not able to accept all, but we're happy to have Her Honor explain if she wants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and to the good chair.
Maybe if Her Honor can make reference to the section also to make it easy for
Yes.
us to follow.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you also to the good chair for actually completing my understanding of the earlier query I raised as to the parliamentary situation.
And if I may
of
just
the bill.
add
Yes, Mr.
also,
President.
it's my attending the energy conference in Singapore that aided me in also understanding so much of the energy industry, which admittedly is new to me. I think we only have one resident expert, Senator Gatchalian, who has been handling this for many years. So a lot of Her Honor's amendments became clearer to me upon listening hours and hours to these experts in energy on chemicals and very technical terms. So we will continue to try.
Mr. President, just to
Majority Leader.
interject, what the Deputy Minority Leader now would be doing is to restate her previous proposed amendments, and the good sponsor will just give a direct answer on why such amendments were not accepted. Just
Yes,
for the record, Mr.
Yes,
President.
they were submitted. We acknowledge the submission in writing, which is a practice that we have, and we accepted what we could. But again, we are happy to hear Her Honor state them. If she wants to explain, we will listen.
Thank you very much, good sponsor and good majority leader, Mr. President. So at least to state them for the record, just so that they are of record, yung ilang proposed amendments. And again, I apologize na hindi ko po ma-cite in connection with the updated pagination and lines, except for one of these, which refers to a proposed amendment to Section 3. So on the old page 3, the old line 11, I had proposed to, after the word contracts.
Can Her
Yes,
Honor
Mr.
mention
President.
just section, and then is there a subsection, a letter M, letter L?
I'll try to complete that, Mr. President. I wonder, Mr. President, if it would be better to go back to my original intention to propose these at the end of the ongoing discussion on
Yes.
the committee amendments, so that on the individual amendments rather, so that
Yes,
I can, out of respect to the chair and the good
Yes.
gentleman from Valenzuela, make my proposed amendments for the record complete.
Yes, the chair
Thank
would
you,
like
Mr.
to agree
President.
with the proposal of Senator Ontiveros, just to expedite the proceedings.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
President. Thank you,
Senator
good
Risa.
colleagues.
Okay,
Senator Pia, you can now proceed.
thank you. The next amendment, Mr. President, is a new Section 16 on the powers and responsibilities of the Philippine Energy Research and Policy Institute. This is a Senator Risa Ontiveros proposal. On page 17, after line 18, insert a new Section 16, which shall read as, Section 16, Powers and Responsibilities of the Philippine Energy Research and Policy Institute, parenthesis, per P, close parenthesis, pursuant to Republic Act Number 11572, otherwise known as the Philippine Energy Research and Policy Institute Act. The per P shall conduct research and development on renewable gas technologies, including production, storage, and distribution with support from the DOST and PNOC. Renumber the succeeding sections accordingly. We submit, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Still on section 16, on page 18, delete line 1 to 8 and replace it with, "The DOE shall be the lead agency in the development of aggregation in the country. The DOE shall determine and designate the aggregator and issue the applicable policies for the implementation thereof, adhering to the principles of economies of scale as well as energy transparency, competitiveness, security, and reliability. The DOE may direct any of its attached agencies and instrumentalities to participate in aggregation activities." We submit, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, on
Yes,
page,
what is the
on-
pleasure
also on
of
the
Senator
same page,
Gatchalian?
Mr. President, um, and this is, Mr. President, a key amendment that we're introducing. On page 17, line 22 to 24.
Is that an anterior amendment, Senator Gatchalian?
Yes, and it's an anterior amendment, Mr. President.
Section 15.
So on line 22 to 24, delete the phrase "organization" for the purpose of this act. The PDNGI shall consist of the following sectors: supply, storage, and regasification, transmission, and distribution of natural gas, and replace it with the word aggregation, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
So, Mr. President, the proposal here is to specify clearly that this provision tackles the concept of aggregation, and later on we will move on into the concepts of aggregation, Mr. President.
So what changes? A minute suspension because we already have a provision
Yes.
on this, so I have to compare what the difference is. Mr. President?
Yes, session suspended.
Hindi, nag-renumber kasi.
Wait, does this stay? This stays. So anong nagbago? shall determine the need for, comma, regulate the development of aggregation and designate the aggregation. Okay na? Accept na? Okay. Sige. Ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Asa na? Andiyan na?
Wala. Yung submission lang.
Mr. President, we accept the amendment of Senator Gatchalian.
Thank
Okay,
you.
is there an objection? There being none, the amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the
Thank
good
you.
sponsor.
So we continue on to 4P. Ito na. The next amendment is Section 21, Authority to Obtain Information. On page 19, line 8, delete the word "to," and on the same page, line 9, replace Section 19 with Section 21. We submit, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
The next amendment is on Section 22. On page 19, line 14, delete the phrase "subject to Section 19 of this Act" and replace it with ERC and PCC. On the same page, line 18, after natural gas, insert the sentence, provided that it is consistent with the state's policy of ensuring energy security and consumer welfare. And on the same page, line 19, after the word supplier, insert the phrase "and aggregator." And on the same page, line 19, after the word fair, insert the phrase "and open." On the same page, line 24 to 25, delete the phrase "and optimal guaranteed utilization volumes for plants." And on page 20, line 4, delete the phrase "this includes requiring electricity supplier to source A," and delete the remaining lines 5 to 7, then replace it with this sentence: "Pursuant thereto, the DOE shall formulate mechanisms that shall prescribe a mandated minimum percentage of the electricity demand of generation companies and/or distribution utilities to be sourced from indigenous natural gas. Such minimum percentage shall be reviewed and adjusted by the DOE as may be necessary." And on the same page, line 8, before the PDNGI facility, insert the phrase "subject to viability." We submit.
Is there an objection? There being none?
Subject to style, Mr. President, the provision appears to be too long.
Yes.
Perhaps
The amendment.
Yes,
the amendment-
exactly. It is one paragraph. Normally, when it's that long, I just say replace it and substitute it with this paragraph. So I asked my staff to show it so everybody can appreciate the change in that section. We can do that, Mr.
All
President.
right. Is there an objection? There being none, amendments is approved subject to style.
Mr. President, just a
Senator
clarification. Has a good sponsor amended page 18, line 1? 18, line 1?
We deleted line 1 to 8 on page 18
Page
and replaced it with the paragraph that I read into the record.
Mr. President, I have an amendment on page 18, Mr. President, lines, on page 18, line 1, after the word agency, replace the word in.
Can I read or give you a copy, because I've deleted lines 1 to 8. It has already been accepted and
And the
replaced it
amendment
with
has
a
already been
paragraph.
approved.
So His Honor can look at the I'm very happy if His Honor still wants to amend it further, but I already made the proposed amendment.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just wait for the clean copy.
I can
after.
just give, I can hand it to you so we
Okay,
can go
Mr.
back to it anytime. Your staff has a copy, Your Honor, if you'd like to take a look at it and make the amendment based
Yep.
on the current wording.
Mr. President, this is the amendment with the word pursuant. I heard the word pursuant a while ago.
1 minute
No,
suspension,
that's
Mr. President.
different.
Session suspended.
Delete pala yung buong ano.
Saan na tayo?
Delete.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Oo.
Session is resumed.
The next item is on section 27 on cross ownership on page 21, line 9. Delete uncompetitive and replace it with anti-competitive. And on the same page, line 11, delete section 13 and replace it with section 14. We submit, Mr. President.
Before we act on it, Senator Gatchalian, have you withdrew your motion to amend?
Well, Mr. President, we'll just wait for the clean copy so that we can take a look at that new provision that was inserted. And if need be, we can add
right.
some more provisions, if need be, Mr.
Okay, there's a
President.
pending motion by Senator Cayetano. Is there any objection?
19, no?
There being none, amendments approved.
Mr. President, I have an anterior amendment, Mr. President. On page 19, after the word DOE, in page 19, in line 14, okay na ba yan? Okay na yan? Okay. On page 19, line 18, after the phrase,
Line 18 or line 14?
line 18.
18.
Page 19, line 18, after the phrase "by gas-fired power plants shall," insert the phrase "undergo competitive bidding to ensure least cost fuel in line with Republic Act Number 9136, and whenever indigenous gas price is equal to or lower than imported natural gas, then indigenous gas shall." So move, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
I need a moment to digest the amendment, Mr. President.
You want a minute
We can
suspension?
suspend for a minute, Mr. President.
Mr. President, perhaps the proponent can read the proposed amendment starting from line 17 in its entirety, Mr. President.
Senator Gatchalian, you wish to read in your amendment?
Yes,
beginning
Mr.
with line
President.
17?
I'll read the entire proposed paragraph, Mr. President. Procurement and utilization of natural gas, including without limitation by gas-fired power plants, shall undergo competitive bidding to ensure least cost fuel in line with Republic Act Number 9136, and whenever indigenous natural gas price is equal to or lower than imported natural gas, then indigenous natural gas shall be prioritized. An indigenous natural gas supplier shall provide fair access to its natural gas supply in a non-discriminatory and transparent manner through physical supply, and so on, Mr. President.
Okay, we will just wait for the,
Yeah. No, I'm ready, Mr. President. I'm
Yes.
ready to respond.
yes, please.
Mr. President, as this representation has been explaining, the purpose of aggregation is really to ensure energy security, and I liken it to the rice supply. Pag wala ho tayong sariling rice supply, we're dependent on foreigners. We're dependent on
Imports.
on imports. And wala tayong mapapakain sa tao sa mga kababayan natin pagka nagkagera yung mga supplier natin o magalit sila sa atin. So we always want to ensure, and that is why we have endless debates also on the importance of food security, starting with rice. So it is the same thing with energy, Mr. President. As I have been explaining since I started defending this bill, the demands, our energy demand will continue to increase. This is worldwide. Yun nga po, kakagaling ko lang sa isang conference, and worldwide, energy demands will increase. Ang example nga binibigay ko po sa ating lahat, kasi yung mga kaedad ko, maaalala nyo to. Natuto ako magbukas ng delata, dipihit yung can opener. Ngayon yung can opener, kailangan pa di baterya. Tapos lumaki din akong paypay. Ngayon pag lumalabas ako, yung mga tao, puro battery operated na yung handheld na paypay. So everything now is powered. That's just the way we roll nowadays, Mr. President. So the energy supply will be very much in demand. Energy will be very much in demand. And the only way we can assure our people of a steady energy supply, and that means reliable, yung hindi pa brown out, at yung presyo, medyo kontrolado natin, is may sarili tayong supply. I don't think it is that difficult to understand that kung may sarili kang supply, okay ka. So on that note, again, a learning I had during my recent conference in energy, ang dami ng bansang gumagawa ng aggregation. Kasi nga, kukunin nila yung supply ng iba-iba. Kasi parang ano ho to parang yung futures market. Yung nagbibid ho dun sa mga grain, sa mga stocks, agricultural products, very common in other countries. So ganun din yung gas. People, the supply will be bidded out. Yung gas company, yung Genco, magbibid siya for his supply 20 years ho yan. 20 years. So right now, pag bid niya, tingin niya ito yung okay na presyo, magbibid siya for 20 years. Wala akong bumibili ng gas na patingi-tingi. Meron, pero ba't nyo gagawin yun? That's very vulnerable if you're going to just bid for your supply for this month, this quarter. You buy wholesale and you buy long-term. That's how it's done. So the purpose of aggregation now is to ensure that may market ang indigenous supply natin. I will put on the screen again, the chart that shows that historically, lagi namang mababa. When I say lagi, let me correct that. Predominantly, mababa naman ang presyo. Yan ho yung color blue. Yan ang presyo ng indigenous gas natin. The blue line. Kung ako ho ay runner, kayang-kaya kong takbuhin yan. Dire-diretso lang yan. Tingnan nyo naman yung color red. Ang tindi ng ups and downs. That is the imported supply. That is data from That is data from 2010 to 2024, dear colleagues. So I'm not inventing this. This is historical data. So I will go back. What we are trying to do here in the natural gas bill is to promote exploration and development of our indigenous natural gas. And for us to promote it, we want to make it inviting to investors. Open to all po to, kahit sino pong investor na may ganyang kakayanan, may ganyang kapasidad at may ganyan ding resources para mag-invest ng indigenous gas. They can come and invest so that tayo naman magkaroon tayo ng security of energy because we have our own indigenous natural gas. So, in this specific provision that His Honor is would like to amend, hindi ho natin matatanggap yan because precisely we need to ensure na may buyers bibili ng mga generation company ang ating indigenous natural gas. Yes, there are slight changes once in a while, pero very minimal po siya. And again, I go back to the comparison with rice. Di syempre, unahin natin ibenta yung sariling atin, yun munang gagamitin natin. So, with all due respect to our colleague, that amendment cannot be accepted.
Mr. President, let me just explain my amendment, Mr. President. And thank you for the explanation. Mr. President, this provision deals with procurement and utilization of natural gas. And in the proposal, and let me just read it, procurement and utilization of natural gas, including without limitation by gas-fired power plants, shall be prioritized over imported natural gas, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, without any bidding, we don't know what prices this prioritization will be charged to our consumers, Mr. President. So all we request is for a bidding to be conducted so that consumers will be assured that the best possible price will be passed on to them. And as an added come on, if the indigenous gas is equal or below, then they will be prioritized. So, Mr. President, what we are proposing here is to have that competitive bidding so all of us will know what prices are power plants buying in terms of gas supply, Mr. President. So that is the proposal. Without this, Mr. President, then the indigenous gas suppliers can charge any price. No, they can charge, there's no restriction whatsoever in terms of pricing. And we have to remember that this gas price will be passed on all the way to the end consumer, Mr. President. So we're just protecting the consumers in this proposal, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we already have a provision in the bill that provides, specifically it says, provided that it is consistent with the state's policy of ensuring energy security and consumer welfare. I've also repeated this a number of times during the period of interpellation because it is our concern that the consumers get the best possible prices. So, hindi naman balak ng ating regulatory agency na mataas yung presyo na makakarating sa mga consumers. Pero ang gusto natin, mabalanse natin yung energy security and consumer welfare. So, that is the reason for we believe that this provision is sufficient to guard the consumers' rights, Mr. President.
Mr. President, once again, thank you for the explanation. Mr. President, we saw the provision on consumer welfare, but consumer welfare is a very wide aspect, Mr. President. You can talk about service, you can talk about delivery of electricity. Pricing is just an aspect of consumer welfare, Mr. President. So to make it narrow, to make sure that from step one, because this is actually step one, Mr. President, this is actually where electricity will begin, when power plants purchase feedstock or purchase natural gas, Mr. President. So we just want to make sure that whenever power plants purchase natural gas, it will be competitive, whether it's indigenous or imported LNG. It will be competitive, Mr. President. But again, as an added support for indigenous gas, if ever their pricing is low, and as demonstrated in the slide that historically they have been lower than imported LNG, then they will get the priority. And that's an assurance that's embedded in the law, Mr. President. So it's just a price assurance or a price discovery mechanism so that consumers will be confident that they are getting the best price, Mr. President.
Mr. President, just a clarification while we are in a lull moment. Mr. President, may we know the importance from the proponent, the importance of adding the word quote-unquote bidding and the lack of mention of it? What will happen?
Well, Mr. President, if you read the original provision, and let me just read it again, the procurement and utilization of indigenous natural gas, including without limitation by gas-fired power plants, shall be prioritized over imported natural gas, Mr. President. So, regardless of the price, they will be prioritized. And actually, in some cases, Mr. President, and in the later months, indigenous gas has actually, in some cases, has actually increased its price more than imported LNG, Mr. President. So, and that will be passed on to our consumers. Again, this is the step one. When power plants buy natural gas, eventually they will convert that into electricity and it will be passed on to consumers, Mr. President. So we just want to have an assurance that in the step one, in the first step, and we all know electricity is a multi-step industry. In the first step, there's already price discovery and bidding, Mr. President. So that's the proposal.
But Mr. President, we were just shown a chart na mababa yun sa blue, mababa lagi yung indigenous.
Then, Mr. President, if that is the case, then indigenous gas will always win.
That is
And
the
they
case.
will be, and they should be confident enough that the bidding, even if there is a bidding or price discovery mechanism, they will win, Mr. President. But the important aspect there is bidding. There is price discovery. There is a way for us to see that this is indeed the best price that the power plants bought.
So it has to be placed there to ensure that the price discovery mechanism would indeed benefit the consumers. Is that
Correct, Mr. President.
That correct?
That's correct, Mr.
Mr. President, can I ask for a minute suspension?
Before the suspension, can I just read the provision into the record?
Yes, please proceed.
There is no desire to hide anything from the consumers. The provision, Section 23, starts, the statement is the procurement, delivery, and pricing of natural gas from indigenous production facilities or from importation to the PDNGI, so both yan, shall be transparent and secure. Nandiyan na ho yan. If necessary, the DOE, ERC, and PCC shall require the suppliers to submit relevant information pertaining to supply contracting, procurement, pricing. It is stated there, Your Honors, pricing and distribution scheme to users for the purpose of monitoring. Again, Mr. President, wala na tayong kailangan i-debate kasi nga, this is 14 years, di ba? So, confident naman tayo na over and above, mababa naman ang presyo ng indigenous gas. But we know how the market works. Like I said, how many years wala na tayong exploration? You know, I attended this conference. It's so embarrassing. The last parang heyday of exploration was in the 70s. Tapos pababa ng pababa ng pababa ang ating investment in exploration of natural gas. Now we have this opportunity to announce to the world that we are open to exploring and developing natural gas. So this is part of our billboard, this is part of our messaging that indigenous natural gas will have buyers in the Philippines. Sinisigurado natin para naman alam ng mga investors may bibili niyan. And nakikita naman dito na hindi naman pwedeng basta-basta pataasin yung presyo dahil hindi naman papayag ang ating regulatory agencies na magbenta sa mga Pilipino ng mas mataas na presyo, yung natural gas na galing sa atin mismo. So, it speaks for itself, Mr. President, and we submit, we reject the amendment with all due respect.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. President. But, Mr.
Mr.
President,
I requested for a minute suspension.
You want a minute suspension?
Yes.
Okay, session suspended.
Si Senator Joel. Senator Joel. Ready to resume?
Session is resumed.
President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2793.
Is there an objection? There being none, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we consider proposed Senate Resolution 1209. This is the resolution congratulating and commending the Senate Sentinels, the